scaling as a leader is accompanied with more complexity. I think one very common misconception is that it shouldn't be as challenging as it is. I think they are so used to being able to make everything on the external, everything on the outside of them, arrange all the chairs on the deck so that things are controllable and work according to plan. And they don't recognize that scaling as a leader is accompanied with more complexity. So this very rigid way of I can control how things work out, which worked for them for a long time in their career, they start experiencing is that as the complexity rises, that approach doesn't work anymore. What is actually required at that time is to be able to expand your range, to be able to deal with the tension. That leadership is actually about being able to hold the tension, not getting rid of the tension, and being able to manage and move forward in spite of the tension. And when there's a reframe, I can visibly see the difference and feel the difference in my leaders who get that and embrace it, and those who don't. Those who don't resist every challenge and obstacle that comes their way. Those who do get it see it as part of the job. It's part of the responsibility. They understand that they can't opt out of that part, and they embrace it. They're kind of like, okay, bring it on, because that is my role. And if I don't want that, then I should take the leadership hat off.
Welcome to Leadership, the podcast where leadership meets real-world insights. In each episode, you can eavesdrop on exclusive conversations with top thought leaders, best-selling authors, and experts in leadership, communication, relationships, culture, and everything else that shapes your effectiveness in the workplace and in your personal life. Leadership is here for you. Now, here's our host, himself a seasoned coach and best-selling author, Dr. Roger Dean Duncan.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Leadership, the podcast where we explore the mindset, skills, and behaviors that leaders need to grow influence that truly matters. My guest for this episode is Muriel Wilkins. She's a sought-after C-suite advisor and executive coach with a 20-year track record of helping senior leaders take their leadership to the next level. Muriel is the host of the Harvard Business Review podcast, Coaching Real Leaders, which consistently ranks as a top 10 podcast in Apple's management category. Muriel's new book is titled Leadership Unblocked: Break Through the Beliefs That Limit Your Potential. This episode of our podcast is not just about leadership, it's about liberation. If you've ever felt stuck, frustrated, or unsure why your efforts aren't producing the results you want, Muriel's insights will help you shift from reactive to reflective, from control to clarity. Get ready to challenge your assumptions, unlock your mindset, and lead with renewed purpose. Muriel Wilkins, welcome to Leadership.
Thank you so much, Roger. It's such a pleasure to be here with you.
Let's start with this. Please tell us what you mean by blocked leadership.
So when I think about blocked leadership, or I talk about it, what I'm really referring to is any time that you as a leader or as an individual feel like there is some dissonance or a gap between what it is that you're experiencing or the results that you're getting and the outcomes that you actually desire, whether they be for yourself, your team, your organization, your business, etc. So anytime that there is that gap, that dissonance, then it ought to be a cue that maybe, just maybe, you're blocked.
So it sounds like something that's blocking you could be a blind spot or not. You could be aware of it, but you could also be unaware of it. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, look, we talk a lot about blind spots when it comes to leaders or, again, just individuals in general. And typically what we're referring to is blind spots in terms of the way that they behave. But when I think about blockers, it goes much more than just the behavior. It is the belief that underlies that behavior, which can be even more hidden. And folks are, not even aware that they're operating in a way that then determines the actions that they have and then ultimately determines the outcomes that they obtain.
Well, among the leaders you coach today, what are the most common limiting beliefs that you see?
Yeah. So, I mean, I was very curious about this because I'd seen this pattern for years, and I looked across a number of leaders that I had worked with and identified 7 that are most popular with them. But I would say there's a few of the 7 that really, particularly in this time that we're in, when folks are experiencing the world as having so much uncertainty. I was talking to a client earlier today, and they were saying it just feels so chaotic is the word that they used. What tends to happen there is there's a blocker around the need to be involved. So this assumption that they have to be involved, they need to be involved, which then leads them to not being able to lead at scale because they hunker down and are down in the weeds, right? I think there's also one right now that is kind of ironic because one of the blockers that gets into leaders' way is this assumption that I need it done now. So there's a sense of urgency required around that. And why a lot of people are feeling frustrated right now is because the context suggests that you might not be able to get things done now at the time that you would like, right? And so those are the 2 that I'm seeing pop up right now in particular, given folks having a reactive stance to what they are, again, experiencing just from the environment.
I've discovered, as you probably have, is that if I have something on my to-do list and I move it from one day to the next a couple of times, maybe it doesn't even need to be on my to-do list. It clearly wasn't that important.
Mm-hmm. That could be, and sometimes that's how I face it too. And other times I just wasn't able to get around to it, right? That's just a fact. Clearly something else took precedence, right? That pushed it off. Or it might be that maybe I had too many things on that to-do list.
Right.
And I think what you're talking about, Roger, here is when we behave in a particular way or act in a particular way, just the way you just said, we just move something to the next day. That's what it is. We move things to the next day. Now, where we get into risky territory is when we start creating a narrative that doesn't serve us well as to why we moved something to the next day, And so what can be risky is if the narrative is, I move something to the next day because I'm not capable of finishing everything on my plate and what's wrong with me. And then you get into that self-doubting territory, which may not be helpful if your goal is to be confident.
Well, most people have an unconscious bias or 2 or more. How can leaders recognize and address theirs?
Yeah. I mean, look, I think we all have unconscious bias in some form or another. And I think the starting point is to acknowledge that that's the case. I don't really, anybody who told me, no, I have no unconscious bias, I'd be like, well, there's probably some unconsciousness right there.
Yeah, there's a little self-awareness issue.
Exactly. So I think first is understanding that that's the case, right? You're not that special that you don't have 1 or 2 or 3. And then the second is to get curious. Right? To get curious around what might they be and be willing to excavate and explore and come face to face with, yes, you do have some, and what are they? And typically what will spark that curiosity is either something on the external. Somebody says to you, look, you're biased, and you're like, me? Yeah. Okay. So maybe you should actually take a look at yourself, or you feel something. I mean, I remember I recognized I had an unconscious bias a couple of years ago about something, and I'm somebody who, really does try to work on my awareness. And I was surprised, but what I was surprised by and what made me curious around what is going on is I remember being in the face of a situation. It was a feeling that I had. And I was like, well, that doesn't feel right, and that then led me to say, well, what literally the curiosity was, what is that about? What is it about this situation that's making me feel this way? And when I kept asking, what is it? I realized, I have this narrative around this particular cast of characters, and clearly it demonstrates a bias, and I had to deal with that. I had to confront it.
I could see how telling that story to one of your clients could be very helpful because it's about acknowledging something that you hadn't seen before and examining it, being curious, and being more self-aware.
Yeah, absolutely. And, when I work with leaders, the first thing is I try to just humanize them because they walk around so much not being humanized by everyone else that they start drinking the Kool-Aid that they're not human either. Right? So a part of it is like, look, you're human, I'm human, we're all sort of human people having this experience. You just happen to be having it in this leadership container. And then I think secondly, it's, getting them to understand that a lot of the practices and a lot of the suggestions that I might provide them with, such as the one that we just talked about, they actually are already applying. It's that they're applying it they apply it to their business, right? When they look at their business or their organization or their team and they're like, oh, something's off. What do? Well, they're like, let me try to understand what's off. Let me try to become aware of what the problem is. And so when they start getting it's not a matter of you not having the skill to do that. It's that you're not applying it on the number one organizational system that's at your disposal 24/7, i.e. yourself. And what if you did the same work that you do with your organization on yourself? Wow. Wouldn't you be able to tap into some potential that's there in the same way that you try to do with your business?
Sure. And it's helpful for them to understand that having those issues is not a character flaw.
That's right.
It's part of being a human being.
Exactly.
Your change initiative has the budget. The strategy looks solid, and everyone's nodding along in the meetings. But for some reason, it's going nowhere. Dr. Roger Dean Duncan knows why. After 40 years in the trenches with top business leaders, he knows that change fails when organizations lack the right foundations: trust, accountability, and real communication. Dr. Duncan's free 10-minute assessment shows you exactly where your organization stands. Answer a few straightforward questions that reveal your true change readiness level. Don't waste months discovering the hard way. Get your free assessment today at leadershop.net/change. Again, that's leadershop.net/change.
Now, Muriel, you write about several strategies to deal with limiting beliefs. What are a couple that you think are most powerful?
Yeah. I think, the first definitely is what we just talked about around being curious and understanding the belief. I think probably the most powerful one is to be able to reframe the belief. It's to be able to look at the belief that might be holding you back, the narrative or the assumption that is getting in the way of, again, you achieving the outcomes that you want because it doesn't align with the behavior or actions that you need. And being able to say, okay, that one doesn't serve me well right now. And so what is the assumption about myself, about others, my team, the organization, the context that would be more aligned with the actions that I need to take in order to get the results that I want, right? And so that act of reframing is very, very helpful and powerful because that is what then gives you choice. And I think where people get stuck is they resist reframing the belief because they are so attached to it. They actually think that it is who they are rather than just a belief, right? Just an assumption that they resist sort of thinking that there might be another possibility. And at that point, it's getting them to understand how it works and also understanding that that's where they actually have agency and choice around how they want to direct it. And also getting them to understand, at the end of the day, I'm all about sustainability. You can take the action, but it's not going to be sustainable if your mindset is not aligned with it. Again, just like if you're running a business, you need your assumptions to be aligned with the execution that you're taking to get to those end results for that business.
Well, how can leaders create a culture where team members feel safe to challenge each other's limiting beliefs? It's part of the culture.
Yeah. I think, look, I always say I'm pulling from a lot of, great masters' work when I say this, but, I do think that a leader cannot transform an organization beyond their capacity to transform themselves.
Exactly.
And so when anybody asks me, oh, well, how can I use this work on others or with my team? I'm start with you first, right? Practice on you first, quote unquote, model it. Because you're going to have a hard time. What we're dealing with here is the inner part, and you're going to have a hard time, frameworking your way through that with others. You've got to be able to experience yourself, grow your capacity to even understand it, and then work on it with others. Now, at a tactical level, I think at the end of the day, this is your ability to coach yourself and then helping build capacity for others on your team to coach themselves as well by looking at their mindset. So you can ask simple questions like, oh, so when you are doing XYZ, what are the assumptions that you're bringing into that? And kicking the tire around assumptions. I think, look, let me give you a very clear example. There was an executive team that was working around making, decisions for promotions. And part of the issue they were having is that they were not, there weren't a lot of females being promoted in their organization. And they kept looking at actions that they could take to make that happen. And I remember having a conversation with the CEO, and I said, well, what you're not questioning is what are the assumptions that are leading to the result that you're having now, which is we're not seeing more females in senior level roles. And what would the assumption need to be? How can you start questioning the assumptions that your team is making that is leading to those results, right? Rather than just the action. So that's how it can be done at the collective level is as a leader, you can kick the assumptions of the culture because the culture is really just a collective set of beliefs.
Sure. And all of this requires some very explicit conversations. I've seen leaders, and so have you. In fact, I've coached leaders in having those conversations with their team members and divulging how they, the leaders, have gone through challenging some of their own assumptions.
Yeah.
And that vulnerability makes it a lot easier for them to coach their team.
Absolutely. So I think it's about making the implicit, explicit, the internal, put it on the table so we can all see it, and creating a level of awareness around. And we're so action biased, it's easy not to do this, right? But it doesn't have to be done. And sometimes teams and individuals don't want to do it because they think it's going to take a huge amount of time. And oh my God, we're going to spend half a day navel gazing. No, just know what questions to ask. And if you know what questions to ask, things like, again, what are we assuming right now? And are those assumptions the ones that are going to lead us to what we say we want as a team or as a culture? If not, what could the reframe be?
Right.
Very simple, very tactical questions that can help unblock a culture, unblock a team, or unblock an individual.
Micromanaging is a fairly common practice with some leaders. Why do they do it? And what are the consequences of doing it? And how can they stop?
Oh my gosh. I mean, how much time do you have?
Yeah.
So, micromanagement, again, is the behavior, right? And I think why somebody micromanages differs from individual to individual. Here's what I know. Why we do what we do is, to a certain extent, driven by what we think about what we do. Right? What we think about, again, ourselves, others, and the situations we're facing. And what we think often serves a couple of different purposes. It enables us to feel safe in our environment. It enables us to feel valued in our environment. It enables us to feel connected or like we belong in our environment. So, if we peel back that onion from a place of micromanaging, right? If one micromanages and said, well, what is behind that? What is it that is driving you to micromanage? What is the assumption that is leading you to then be, on top of your people as much as you are?
Right.
And it is, well, if I'm not, everything will go wrong. Okay, well, what happens is you go wrong. You really peel back. It usually comes back to a notion of worthiness or safety. If things don't go wrong, if I do not micromanage, I will not be safe. The whole world will fall apart. We will all not be safe. And so helping leaders understand that will then kind of get them to a place of saying, okay, maybe that rule doesn't need to be applied across the board. And maybe that rule helped me at one point, but it doesn't help me now. So It is you can throw all the tactics of not micromanaging to someone, start delegating, build capacity. But I will tell you, I've seen over and over again, it doesn't work in a sustainable way unless they really get under the hood to understand the why behind it. Okay. And I think it's so important to understand that micromanagement is not bad all around. You just don't need to be operating like that 100% 24/7. There are certain areas, and the frame that I use with my clients is what is the level of risk associated with what it is that you're managing, and let that determine the level of engagement that you need to have, of which one can be your level of engagement is in the weeds, i.e. micromanaging.
Now, you've worked with many high-level executives. What is one common misconception they seem to have about leadership that they need to overcome?
I think I've been sitting with this one. I think one misconception, very common misconception that they need to overcome is that it shouldn't be as challenging as it is. And here's why, Roger. I think they are so used to being able to make everything on the external, everything on the outside of them, arrange all the chairs on the deck so that things are controllable and work according to plan. And they don't recognize that as they scale, that becomes more complex, right? Scaling as a leader is accompanied with more complexity. And so this very rigid way of I can control how things work out, which worked for them for a long time in their career, they start experiencing, not necessarily seeing, they start experiencing that as the complexity rises, that approach doesn't work anymore. What is actually required at that time is to be able to expand your range, to be able to deal with the tension. That leadership is actually about being able to hold the tension, not getting rid of the tension, and being able to manage and move forward in spite of the tension. Okay. And when there's a reframe, I can visibly see the difference and feel the difference in my leaders who get that and embrace it, and those who don't. Those who don't resist every challenge and obstacle that comes their way. Those who do get it, see it as part of the job. It's part of the responsibility.
Right.
They understand that they can't opt out of that part, and they embrace it. They're kind of like, okay, bring it on, because that is my role. And if I don't want that, then I should take the leadership hat off.
Muriel Wilkins, thank you so much for joining us on Leadership. As Muriel has reminded us, leadership isn't just about what you do, it's also about what you believe. The most powerful transformation begins within. When we confront our internal blockers, we stop managing symptoms and start addressing root causes. The path to unblock leadership may not be easy, but it's essential. So ask yourself, what belief is quietly shaping your performance today, and what might happen if you let go? To learn more about Muriel and her work, visit her website at murielwilkins.com. If you found this episode valuable, please share it with your team, your network, or anyone else who's ready to lead with more confidence, more courage, and more impact. And be sure to leave a review of our podcast. Every single sentence fuels the algorithms that promote the great content that the Leadership podcast provides. And for free resources to help you in your leadership journey, go to leadership.net. That's leadership.net. Thanks again for joining us. Until next time, stay safe, be happy, and spread good cheer wherever you go. For Leadership, I'm Roger Dean Duncan.